The 1980s was a fantastic decade to live in if you were a video game player. From the start of the Atari 2600 up through the 8-bit Nintendo and Sega Master System, towards the very end of the 80s, we started creeping into the Sega Genesis 16-bit generation. However, for many of us during that period of time, it wasn't about playing those game systems. It was about actually playing some of the 8-bit computers that were out. Most of us grew up using Apple IIs in school. However, at home, we typically had one of these, Commodore 64. And while it was common for us to use those computers at home, we also had a big bulky floppy disk drive set beside a 1541. These things were loud, unreliable, and just slow as hell. I mean, they worked at the time because that's all you had. However, now in the modern times, if you're a modern retro gamer, you don't want to load everything from floppy. You want to have things on compact flash or some sort of SD card. That's when you get yourself something like a disk drive emulator, the 1541 Ultimate 2. Okay, so we have my Commodore 64. I went and disconnected it, and we'll spin it around here so we can take a look back of the unit. Maybe you're not familiar with the Commodore 64 and you're wanting to get into it, so you want to maybe a quick rundown of what we have here. On the back left, back right looking to front, but on the back left is an expansion port. This is cartridge slot. There were some games and utility cartridges, fast loaders, freezer carts that allow you to edit games. You could do kind of like hacking games and stuff. But anyways, there was a port here that you plug cartridges into, which is actually where the 1541 plugs into. To the right, there's an RF connection, no one's going to use. And to the right here is a video port, which outputs both audio and video. Commodore 64s, except for the very first original breadbands, output both composite and S-video and mono audio. To the right is a serial port. This is for your disk drive. A little bit further over is a cassette interface, which I'll show you a little bit more on that later. And then the user port, which some accessories use that. We're not going to be using that for this 1541. On the right hand side, we have two joystick ports, power switch, and we have the power inlet for the external power supply. Other side of the Commodore, nothing on that side. So anyways, let's go ahead and talk about some of the 1541 stuff. I'm going to go quickly back over the connectors and ports on the 1541 Ultimate 2. Looking at the top of it, you have a couple LEDs. These are like a status LEDs, letting you know when it's reading, writing, basic functionality, when it's doing something. On top you have three switches. The center one cannot be changed. These two can be flip-flopped around, but the center one is the ultimate menu. When you boot the machine up, you press that, it'll go into the 1541 Ultimate 2 menu where you can go through and you can pick games, applications, SID files. Anytime you want to launch something, you can do it from there without having to cumbersomely go through the Commodore Basic. To the right's a reset button. It's designed to interface with the left button, which is the cartridge button. This cartridge can be programmed as, besides the 1541 Ultimate, by default it does that. It can also be configured as a fast loader cart or a freezer cart, and you press that button to load that up. On the right side, we have our serial connection, the same connector you'd use with your floppy drive back in the day. Stereo SID port. If you want to pump audio into your system and for stereo SIDs, instead of modifying the Commodore, you can plug a cable into that. And on this side, you have two little slots. You have a USB port, which you can take a common thumb drive, load it full of games, music, whatnot, and plug it in there, like so. And you have a micro SD slot. The micro SD slot's really tight. I mean, it's really fiddly to get in there. Even I have big hands, but even if you have smaller hands, if you don't have some long fingernails, the connector for the micro SD slot's so far back in there, it's not a great design. I wish you'd redesign that. And on the bottom, there's a tiny little slit there with a connector. This is actually where the tape connector slides into. You plug one end of the tape adapter into there, and then the other side goes into the machine. When you buy the 1541 Ultimate 2, you'll get the cartridge, and you'll get the data cable with it. This plugs into the disk drive port, the port labeled serial. You can also buy as accessories for a few euros. You can buy the LAN adapter. This plugs into the USB port. As of right now, this is not enabled. Gideon, who develops the 1541 Ultimate 2, promises in the future firmware, the next firmware, the 3.0 firmware, that this will be enabled. You could use this for hooking to Telnet bulletin board systems or other kinds of communication software. And also, presumably, there'll be an FTP client built into the the cartridge, 1541 cartridge. That way you can actually plug this thing into your LAN, and then from your computer you can actually FTP data over to it. You could send files over to the storage, so you don't even have to pull your micro SD card out, or whatever, to load software onto. So that's a pretty neat feature. And then last, which I didn't mention this in my desk tour, even though it was sitting on top beside the LAN adapter on top of my XRGB, this is the tape adapter. This allows you to actually play cassette games, because otherwise you have to actually be able to send it to the cassette port. Let me go ahead and show you how all this connects up. First, the 1541 Ultimate 2 plugs into the cartridge port. And then you take your cable, plug it in there, plug into your serial port, and then the tape adapter. If you want to use this, I probably won't use this too much, but if you do, it plugs into the cassette interface, and then on the very bottom of the 1541 Ultimate, let me see if I can get this in focus here, there's a little slot there. Plugs in there, and you're done. Okay, I've got my Commodore 64 all hooked back up. I've got plugged into my XRGB2, and that's piped into my PC CRT. So I'm not using an old school 1701, 1702 Commodore monitor, but this is a pretty good solution. This allows me to use multiple RGB sources and composite this video and get some of the best quality I can for the hardware I have on hand. So let's go ahead and fire up the Commodore. When you first power up your 1541 Ultimate 2 for the first time, this is the default fast cartridge that's loaded into it. It's the Retro Replay, which you can see some configuration options on the screen. Configuring menu, normal reset utilities, install the fast load. I'm not going to go into this in great detail because there's other videos on YouTube that does this far more justice than I could. However, you'll notice at the bottom, my machine's a PAL C64 with a PAL 64K ROM, so you know that this is indeed a PAL machine rather than NTSC. And also the REU, there's only a couple of freezer cartridges that's compatible with the REU, which is Commodore's RAM expansion unit, which added certain amounts of memory back to the Commodore 64. Most of the software designed for the 64, I would say literally 99% of it, both software, games, demos, applications, were designed with the stock 64 kilobytes of memory in the machine. However, Commodore came out with an REU unit, which expanded the RAM into the computer. It gave it up to, I believe, I don't know if it's another 64K. I don't remember the exact details, but it allowed more memory into the machine. So for applications like GEOS, which was a graphical operating system, looked very much like early Macintosh. It would have enough RAM for that to run. Whereas games and demos, for the most part, don't use that. There's a few things that use it, but for the most part, it's not used. The thing we want to concentrate on is the middle button in the back of the unit. We press that, and boom, we have the 1541 Ultimate screen. As you can see at the top of the screen, it shows that we have firmware 2.6K. That's the most recent as of today. And Gideon promises that 3.0 is coming soon. And you'll see two options on the screen. First one's for the SD card, which you'll see also that says no media, because I have no media inserted into the card slot, it's empty. And then down below there you'll see USB 1.0, which I have a SanDisk thumb drive in there. So if we use our arrow key, we go down to that, and then we press the right arrow, we go into what's on the card. I've got a few things loaded up on here that I'm going to go ahead and show. The 1541 Ultimate can play back music right from the cartridge. It'll play through the Commodore, so it's native hardware, but you don't have to load up an extra application. I'm going to demo a few things today. We'll start with the high voltage SID collection. I've got some music on here. I've got the whole collection on here, so we'll go ahead and play some of those. I'm going to go down to musicians, go into that, go down to C, go into that. And we'll go down and we'll look for Cooksley, Mark Cooksley. Oh, there he is. Arrow in again. Now we have different SID tunes that he has produced back in the day whenever he was doing game music. I'm going to look down for one of my favorites on the C64, the Ghosts and Goblins song. You can see different tunes in there. So on the screen, when we pick it, we hit return, and you have a couple options. You can play the main tune. You can select subtunes. In case the SID has multiple subtunes under it, you can pick that. In this case, we'll play the main tune. And on the screen, it'll give you some information. It'll tell you the title, the author, when it was released, the clock it was designed for. I'm guessing this is going to tell you whether or not it was designed for PAL or NTSC machines. And I'm willing to bet the majority of what you see out there is going to be PAL. If you see very much NTSC, I will be very surprised. And then from here, if you want to exit this tune, you can just hit the center button, the 1541 Ultimate menu screen. You'll hear the SID stops, the music stops, and then you can go through and you pick something else. Tell you what, let's go through and let's go back. Let's look in H. Let's go down and find Rob Hubbard, who is one of the most famous Commodore 64 musicians. There he is. Oops. And let me go back down and find him again. There we go. And let's play the Commando song in main tune. This is another favorite of mine. Alright, hit the middle button, goes back to the ultimate screen. Let's go back and check out a few demos. Go ahead and go down here to our demos, go in here, download some demos and place them on my thumb drive. So we'll go ahead and just check one out here. We'll go into this one, hit run, or hit return rather. When you hit return, you'll bring up a menu of items. The first option being run disk, which will be the one you typically use to launch. Mount disk, which basically does just that. It's like putting the disk in the drive and doing nothing but that. It doesn't automatically launch anything or start anything. It just put it in the drive, which is how you change disks. You just go back and remount the new disk. Mount disk read only in case you have something you're afraid to write back to it, so you don't overwrite your disk. Then you have a few other options here. You have the ability to emulate a pair of 1541 disk drives. By default, I believe the 1541 is configured for a single drive, but you can change that. And there's some other options like renaming and deleting the image. We're just gonna go ahead and run this disk. Okay, now as you can see by the screen, it's telling us to insert side 2 of the disk, or in this case, a second disk. Now to insert the second disk that it's asking for, all we have to do is hit the middle button to bring up the 1541 Ultimate screen, go down to the second image, hit return, mount disk. So we hit return. And it continues. And actually on the back of the unit here, I'm not sure if you can see it, there's a couple little LEDs that I mentioned before. You can see there's a green one and a red one there. The green one indicates power to that drive, in this case the A drive, the A1541. The little red light's like a read indicator, like a access indicator. And there's a second set of LEDs over here, which I presume are the same thing. I'm guessing it's for the B drives, because you can emulate a pair of drives on this unit. Maybe you're interested in knowing more information about options when you're navigating the unit and how to use it. If you hit F3, it'll bring up a small little help file, which shows you how to basically navigate the menus and things to do. If we hit F1 and F7 by default, as you can see, it goes in top and bottom of the listing. So in other words, we go into something here which has a lot of stuff. Go into my game base. Give a couple seconds to load. F1 goes to the top, F7 pages down. So F1's paging up, F7 is paging down. So this makes it easy to navigate through a bunch of stuff. And if you want to go back one directory, you hit the shift and the back cursor key, or the left cursor key. We'll go back out. If we hit F5, it brings up some options. We have the ability to create a D64, a G64, create directories, reset the IEC. I'm guessing you're resetting the bus in case something happens. There's a bunch of utilities built into it and a bunch of stuff that, to be honest, is probably outside the scope of this video. We can launch options by holding the shift key and pressing the F1, F2 key. And we have a whole slew of options in here. Most of these are outside the scope of this video, but we'll go ahead and visit a few of them. Clock settings. As you can tell by the fact that it has current time, which today is in fact July 22nd, 2015, and the time is correct, it indeed has a real-time clock built into it. And you can set this, configure this as you like. To exit out of these menus, hit Run Stop to go back to your 1541 screen, then hit Shift F2 to go back in again. USB settings. You can go through and set maximum bus current, bus speed, load boot images from USB. To be honest, I haven't touched any of this stuff, and you probably won't either, but you have the ability to configure it if you need to. Audio output settings. This deals with using the little stereo output connector on the side. I believe you can actually output the sounds the disk drive makes. That's something I personally don't care about, but nonetheless you have the ability to do that. Software IEC settings. More stuff you can tinker with. Ultimate command interface. More stuff you can tinker with, stuff I wouldn't use, but you might. Now, this is probably one you're interested in, the C64 cartridge screen. Now here's where you can configure through the cartridges. You can go through and you can see all kinds of different cartridges you can configure that by default when the machine boots up. In this case, you can just go through and pick NTSC and PAL ones. There's Epic's Fast Loader, some custom ones. Final Kart 3, very popular. Action replays. I'm just going to go back around to the first one. And then you have a bunch of options out there where you can do alternate kernels. You can set the RAM expansion unit. You can have it enabled or disabled, and you can set how much memory it has. And then you can see there's a bunch of other options down here. The button order, this actually changes the button order on the back of the unit. So the default will always be for the menu for the 1541, but you can change which side the freezer and which side the reset's on, so you can change that back and forth. Go ahead and go back out, come back in. User interface settings, I don't think there's anything in there interesting. Oh yeah, you can change the colors. Like if you don't like a black background with a white border, you can change all that. 1541, you can configure the 1541 drive. My first 1541 drive is enabled. It shows you the drive bus ID. You can pick different ROM files. I'm guessing this is like, say if you had Jiffy DOS or something like that. I'm not sure if you can do Jiffy DOS on a cartridge, but if you do something like that, you can do an alternate ROM inside the drive. And then you have a bunch of different delays you can do on the drive and other options. Stuff that, again, to be honest, for the average user who just wants to play some games and demos, you probably don't need to mess with any of this stuff. And then you have drive B. Mine's disabled by default. No reason to enable it, to be honest. I guess maybe if you're copying, I suppose, like say if you want to copy between two disk images, maybe you'd have two drives enabled. Not something I'd use, but again, maybe something you'd use. Well, I hope you enjoyed this brief look at the 1541 Ultimate 2. It's a very handy device if you're a Commodore 64 user. Games, music, all that stuff, demos, you can play all that stuff. It just makes life a lot easier.